The altars are cold, the pacts are sealed. Today, two massive armies clash in the theater of Athens to decide who lives and who dies. Last time, Palamon begged the gods for love, while Arcite demanded victory. The gods accepted their terms, but be careful what you pray for. Because the ancient god Saturn has found a way to grant both wishes, at a terrible cost. Welcome to the bloody finale of the Knight's Tale. That Monday in Athens was a massive celebration. It was the height of May, and everyone was in such high spirits that they danced and jousted all day long in service of Venus. But because they had to be up early the next morning to see the great fight, people eventually headed off to bed. When Tuesday morning broke, the hostels all around the city woke up to the noise of horses and the clattering of armor. A massive crowd of lords rode toward the palace on steeds and palfreys. If you were there, you would have seen the most incredible display of gear. Rare expensive decoration, rich embroidery and fine goldsmithing. There were bright shields, helmets and trappings of pure gold. Lords wore ceremonial robes over their armor. Squires were busy nailing heads onto spears and buckling helms. You could hear the rubbing of shields being polished and leather straps being laced. Nobody was idle. Foamy horses gnawed at golden bridles. Armorers ran back and forth with files and hammers. Yeomen and servants packed the street, thick as bees carrying short staffs. Drums, trumpets, and clarions, the kind that blow bloody sounds during battle, filled the air. The palace was buzzing. People gathered in groups of 3 or 10, debating, guessing, and arguing about the two Theban knights. Some said, "I bet on the black beard." Others said, "No, the bald man will win," or "The guy with the thick hair looks grim. He's got a battle-axe that weighs 20 pounds. The hall was full of this kind of guessing long after the sunrise. Finally, the great Duke Theseus woke up, roused by the music and the noise. He stayed in his chamber until the two Theban knights, Arcite and Palamon, were honored and brought to the palace. Theseus took his seat at a window, looking like a god on a throne. The people pressed forward to see him and hear his command. A herald called for silence, and once the noise died down, he announced the Duke's will. He said, "The Lord, in his high discretion, has decided that it would be a waste of noble blood to fight a mortal battle today. So to ensure no one dies, he is changing the rules." The crowd listened closely. "No man," the herald shouted, "on pain of death may bring a projectile, a poleaxe, or a short knife into the arena. No one may draw a short sword to stab. You may only ride one course with a sharp spear. If you want a fence on foot, you can. But here is the catch. If anyone gets into trouble or is overpowered, they won't be killed. They will be dragged to a stake at the side of the arena. Once you are at the stake, you must stay there. And if either chieftain, Arcite, or Palamon is taken or killed, the tournament ends. Now go forth and fight your fill. Godspeed." The people shouted so loud that their voices seemed to touch the heaven. "God save such a good lord," they cried, "who wills no destruction of blood." Trumpets blasted, and the procession rode to the arena. The city streets were hung with cloth of gold, not just cheap wool. Theseus rode like a lord, with the two Thebans on either side. After them came the Queen and Emily. They arrived at the lists early in the day. Theseus took his high seat with the ladies. On the west side, under the statue of Mars, Arcite entered with his 100 knights and a red banner. At the exact same moment, on the east side under Venus, Palamon entered with a white banner. You couldn't find two companies in the entire world so evenly matched. No one could say that one side was wiser, wealthier, or braver than the other. They arranged themselves in 2 rows. Their names were read out to make sure there was no cheating. Then the gates were shut, the cry went up, "Do your duty, young knights." The heralds stopped spurring their horses, the trumpets rang out. There was nothing more to say. East and west spears were lowered into rests. Sharp spurs kicked into horses' sides. Now we see who can ride. Shafts shivered and shattered against thick shields. You could feel the prick of steel right through the breastplate. Spears flew 20 feet into the air. Swords flashed like bright silver. Helmets were hacked to pieces, and blood burst out in grim red streams. Bones were crushed with mighty maces. Knights stumbled and horses went down, rolling underfoot like balls. One knight fought with a broken shaft. Another was thrown down by a horse. A man was hurt through the body and dragged to the stake, unwilling, but forced to stay there by the rules. From time to time, Theseus called a break so they could rest and drink. These two Thebans, Palamon and Arcite, met several times. They unhorsed each other twice. There is no tiger in the valley whose cub has been stolen that is as cruel as Arcite was that day. And there is no lion, crazy with hunger, that desires blood as much as Palamon desired to kill Arcite. Their strokes bit deep into their helmets, but everything must have an end. Before the sun set, the strong King Emetrius, who was fighting for Arcite, seized Palamon. He wounded him deeply. Palamon was grabbed by 20 men. He refused to yield, but they dragged him to the stake. Trying to rescue him, the strong King Lycurgus was knocked down. Even King Emetrius was knocked out of his saddle a sword's length away. But it was all for nothing. Palamon was captured. His brave heart couldn't help him now. By the rules of the game, he was out. Who was sadder than Palamon? He couldn't fight any more. When Theseus saw this, he shouted, "Ho, no more, it is done. I will be a true judge. Arcite of Thebes has won Emily by his fortune." The crowd roared so loud, it felt like the arena walls would fall down. But up in the heavens, Venus was weeping because her knight, Palamon, had lost. She cried so hard her tears fell into the list. She said, "I am ashamed." But Saturn, the ancient god, said, "Daughter, hold your peace. Mars has his will for now, but by my head you shall be eased soon." Down below, the trumpeters and heralds were yelling with joy for Arcite. But listen closely, because the mood was about to change. Arcite took off his helmet to show his face. He spurred his horse to ride a victory lap, looking up at Emily. And she looked back at him with a friendly eye, for women, generally speaking, tend to follow the favor of fortune. She was all his in heart and expression. Suddenly, a fire from hell, sent by Pluto at Saturn's request, burst out of the ground. Arcite's horse was terrified. It turned and leaped aside, stumbling as it jumped. Before Arcite could catch his balance, he was pitched forward right onto the pommel of his saddle. He hit it so hard his chest bone shattered. He lay there on the ground as if he were dead. His face went black as coal because the blood rushed to it. They carried him out of the arena, his heart sore, to Theseus's palace. They cut his armor off him and put him in a bed. He was still alive and conscious, and he kept crying out for Emily. Duke Theseus went back to the city with heavy solemnity. Even though this accident had happened, he didn't want to discourage everyone. He told them Arcite would heal, and people were relieved that no one had actually died, even though many were badly hurt, especially one guy who had a spear through his breastbone. They treated the wounds with salve, charms, and herbal drinks. The Duke honored everyone and held a feast all night long. No one considered it a disgrace to have been dragged to the stake. That was just bad luck, not cowardice. Theseus announced that both sides had one equal honor to stop any jealousy. He gave gifts, and after 3 days of feasting, he escorted the visiting kings out of town. But for Arcite, things were not going well. His chest began to swell. The clotted blood around his heart grew corrupt. No doctor could help him. Bloodletting and cupping didn't work. His lungs began to swell, and the poison destroyed the muscles in his chest. He couldn't vomit up the poison or pass it. Nature had lost the battle. And when nature won't work, it's time to say farewell to medicine and carry the man to the church. Arcite was dying. He sent for Emily and his cousin Palamon. He whispered to his lady, "I cannot tell you the sorrow I feel. I bequeath the service of my spirit to you, above every creature. Alas the woe, alas the pain, alas my Emily, alas my wife, my heart's lady, the ender of my life." He looked at her and said, "What is this world? What do men ask for? Now with his love, now in his cold grave all alone. Farewell, my sweet." Then he spoke softly. "I have had strife with my cousin Palamon for many days because of jealousy. But as surely as Jupiter guides my soul, I know of no man in this world so worthy of love as Palamon. He has truth, honor, wisdom, and humility. If you ever decide to be a wife, forget not Palamon, the gentle man." His speech began to fail. The cold of death rose from his feet to his breast. His arms lost their strength. Only his intellect remained as his heart felt death approaching. His eyes grew dim, his breath failed, but he cast one last look at his lady. His last words were, "Mercy, Emily." His spirit changed houses and went to a place I cannot describe, because I have never been there. So I will stay silent about that. Arcite was cold. Emily shrieked. Palamon howled. Theseus's sister had to carry Emily away swooning. The sorrow in the town was infinite. Young and old wept. It was like the day Hector was brought dead to Troy. "Why did you have to die?" the women cried. "You had gold enough and you had Emily." No one could comfort Duke Theseus except his old father, Aegis. Aegis knew the transience of the world. He said, "Just as no man ever died who didn't live first, no man ever lived who didn't eventually die. This world is just a thoroughfare of woe, and we are pilgrims passing through. Death is the end of every worldly pain." Theseus finally began to plan the funeral. He decided to build the pyre in the very same grove where Arcite and Palamon had first fought for love. He commanded huge old oaks to be hacked down. They laid them in a row. Officers ran to prepare the pyre. They covered a bier with cloth of gold and dressed Arcite in a matching suit. They put white gloves on his hands and a laurel crown on his head. They put a bright sword in his hand and laid him out with his face uncovered. Theseus wept so much it was pitiful to hear. Palamon came, with a beard unkempt and hair full of ash, wearing black clothes stained with tears. To make the service noble, Theseus had 3 white horses led out, trapped in glittering steel covered with Arcite's arms. Riders carried his shield, his spear, and his Turkish bow with a case of burnished gold. They rode slowly toward the grove. The noblest Greeks carried the bier through the main street of the city, which was draped in black. Old Aegis walked on one side, Theseus on the other, carrying vessels of gold filled with honey, milk, blood, and wine. Then came Emily, carrying fire in her hand to light the pyre, as was the custom. The labor to build the pyre was immense. The green top of it reached toward heaven, and it was 20 fathoms broad. They used straw, dry sticks, green wood, spices, cloth of gold, and precious stones. They hung garlands of flowers and burned myrrh and incense. I won't tell you how the nymphs and fauns ran away when the trees were felled, or how the ground was terrified to see the sun for the first time. I won't describe in detail how Emily lit the fire and swooned, or how the Greeks rode around the fire 3 times shouting and clattering their spears. Eventually, Arcite was burnt to cold ashes. They held a wake and played funeral games, wrestling naked and anointed with oil. And then everyone went home. Years passed. The mourning finally stopped. There was a parliament in Athens to discuss alliances with certain countries and to demand obedience from Thebes. Theseus sent for Palamon. Palamon didn't know why he was being called, so he came in his black mourning clothes. Theseus also sent for Emily. When they were seated and the place was hushed, Theseus waited a moment, looked at them with a serious face, and spoke. "The first mover who made the great chain of love had a high intent," he said. "He bound fire, air, water, and land together. He established that everything in this wretched world has a certain duration. Everything must end. The oak tree which lives so long eventually wastes away. The hard stone under our feet wears down. Rivers run dry. Great towns disappear. Men and women are the same. Kings and pages alike must die, some in bed, some in the deep sea, some on the battlefield. It is necessary. So, it is wisdom to make a virtue of necessity. It is best to die when one is at the height of their fame, as Arcite did. Why do we grudge him his honor? Why do his cousin and his wife resent his welfare? He is out of the prison of this life." Theseus smiled gently. "After sorrow I advise we be merry. Let us thank Jupiter, and before we leave this place, let's turn two sorrows into one perfect joy." He turned to Emily. "Sister, this is my decision. Gentle Palamon, your own knight, has served you with heart and might for years. He has suffered great adversity for you. You should take pity on him and take him as your husband. Give me your hand." Then he turned to Palamon. "I don't think I need to preach much to get you to agree to this. Come near and take your lady by the hand." And right there, by the council of the barons, the bond of marriage was made. Palamon wedded Emily with bliss and melody, and God, who made this wide world, sent love to him who had paid so dearly for it. Palamon lived in riches and health. Emily loved him tenderly, and he served her so gently that there was never a single harsh word or moment of jealousy between them. Thus ends the story of Palamon and Emily, and God save all this fair company. And that brings us to the end of our video. If you enjoyed this story, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more legends of old. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next tale.